Dear friends, welcome to another episode of The Spoke Master. In this video, we'll discuss how the United States, during Carter's administration, facilitated the birth of Iran's theocratic dictatorship led by Ayatollah Khomeini. To understand Iranian Revolution and Jimmy Carter's role, we must first look at the global scenario of the 1970s, a time of deep uncertainty and transformation. In the U.S., the Watergate scandal and the dishonorable exit from Vietnam had deeply shaken American confidence in their political leadership. Economically, the world was feeling the effects of the 1973 oil crisis when OPEC members, led by Arab countries, imposed an oil embargo that sent prices soaring. In this context, Iran, a major oil producer, was seen as a key piece in American foreign policy. Under the regime of Shah Reza Pahlavi, the country stood out as a strategic ally of the United States. It's important to remember that the Shah came to power in Iran thanks to a CIA-instigated coup in 1953, which resulted in the fall of an anti-Western regime that had just nationalized all Iranian oil. As a consequence, the Shah positioned himself as a defender of the West in the Middle East, maintaining close ties with Israel and refusing to participate in the Arab-led oil embargoes. Additionally, the Shah spent billions on American weapons, ensuring his country's military presence in the Persian Gulf. In 1977, Jimmy Carter, on one of his first official trips as president, visited Tehran where, during a toast to the Shah, he described Iran as an island of stability. This widely cited statement symbolized American belief in the robustness of the Shah's regime. However, as we now know, this island of stability was about to be engulfed by a revolutionary wave. The situation in Iran began to change dramatically in 1978. Growing popular discontent reached a breaking point. Student protests erupted in the streets and quickly spread throughout the country, fueled by a combination of factors including endemic corruption, with major scandals involving oil sales and overpriced defense purchases, and the brutal repression by the regime through SAVAK, the Shah's secret police. Ayatollah Khomeini, a cleric then exiled in France, emerged as the central figure of the opposition, with his messages disseminated through recordings and speeches sent to Iran, further inflaming the population. For many Iranians, Khomeini represented not just an alternative to the Shah, but a hope for justice and national autonomy. Throughout much of 1978, Carter was focused on other issues, like the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel and, primarily, the normalization of U.S. relations with Communist China. So when he finally turned his attention back to Iran, he found a weakened, divided government in a chaotic environment. Carter's own administration was divided, with the State Department, led by Democratic political partners, advocating for negotiations and concessions, while the National Security Council called for a more aggressive intervention to save the Shah's regime. Carter, generally idealistic, showed a pragmatic side by authorizing the U.S. ambassador in Tehran to encourage the Shah to take harsh measures to restore order. However, by 1978, the Shah was debilitated both physically, due to cancer, and politically and emotionally. At that moment, he simply lacked the strength or support needed to quell the protests. In January 1979, the situation reached a critical point, with the Shah forced to leave Iran, paving the way for a provisional government. However, this government had no real control, and Khomeini quickly consolidated his power with his triumphant return to Iran in February 1979, marking the beginning of a new era. During this period, Carter and his advisors considered what they called Plan C, a military coup led by Iranian generals, essentially a repeat of the 1953 plan to overthrow the nascent Khomeini regime. But the Iranian military was as demoralized as the Shah himself, with many powerful generals from the old regime fearing reprisals, choosing instead to flee the country. Thus, without internal support, Plan C never left the drawing board. On February 11, 1979, Iran officially became an Islamic republic led by a theocratic dictatorial regime. The impact of this revolution was profound, altering the balance of power in the Middle East and redefining Iran's relationships with the West. With the new regime under Ayatollah Khomeini, fully aware of the U.S. role in the former Shah's regime, Washington was labeled public enemy #1. The relationship between the U.S. and the new Iranian government hit its lowest point in November 1979 when militants stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage, initiating a crisis that would last 444 days. Carter, pressured after his hesitant and weak performance leading to the Shah's fall, tried everything to resolve the crisis, authorizing Operation Eagle Claw, a military rescue mission that ended in tragedy due to logistical problems and an accident in the desert, resulting in the deaths of 8 American soldiers. The images of the wreckage were broadcast worldwide, reinforcing the perception that Carter was a weak and indecisive leader. However, despite appearances, Carter wasn't as passive as he seemed, and in December 1979, he authorized the CIA to start a campaign to promote the formation of a new democratic government in Iran, which included contacting dissidents and attempting to form a coalition against Khomeini's regime. Nonetheless, by 1980, the Iranian Theocratic regime was already consolidated, and these initiatives had little impact. At the end of his term, Carter left a controversial legacy regarding Iran. He was a president who tried to influence the fate of a nation in revolution, but his initiatives failed due to a combination of hesitation, cultural misunderstandings, political limitations, and events beyond his control. Some argue that if Carter had paid more attention to Iran in 1977 and hadn't been so distracted by other issues like rapprochement with China, the theocratic dictatorship led by Khomeini would have been confronted much more firmly. The case of Iran reminds us of the limitations of American power and the complexity of dealing with popular movements in complex cultural contexts.